All right.
Now, there's a new player in Vancouver civic politics. It's the Metro Vancouver Alliance, or the MVA. They are an organization of organizations that bring diverse groups of people together to tackle issues and hold politicians accountable. This segment by Deborah Angrave and LJ Meyer explains.
Sister Judy Donovan, and I'm an organizer with the Industrial Areas Foundation. The IAF is a 60-plus-year-old organization that is international, started in the U.S. but is now international, that provides training and support for both local institutions that want to come together and build a broad-based organization and the professional organizers who provide training and support for them.
Hi, my name's Rick. I've come in from White Rock, where I live. I'm part of a group out there called the Surrey White Rock Food Action Coalition. And one of my colleagues in that group recommended that the MVA would be a really good place to learn about community organization and help us achieve some of our goals of food security, food justice, and improving food literacy in our community.
So the IAF focuses on building local organizations of member institutions who want to strengthen their own institution, who want to identify and explore issues affecting their families, and who want to go into action together on those issues.
In my role as the regional lead organizer, I was asked to help with a group of people who were just beginning to think about starting a similar kind of organization in Vancouver. And there was a group that was started mostly in the downtown east side, and my predecessor had been working with them for a little bit, and when he left, I took his place and started working with them to think about how do you build this kind of organization, how do you raise money to hire an organizer, and got it to the point where we raised enough money to hire Deborah, the current MVA organizer.
So there's a lot of ways to bring about community change, and we don't have the way, but our way is through focusing on institutions. So we do institutional-based organizing, and so we look for where do individuals and families come together to find meaning, to interpret the world, to act on their values, and those most often fall into three different clusters of institutions. Faith-based institutions, churches, synagogues, mosques, temples, work-based institutions, labor unions, workers' associations, and then community institutions. Can be settlement houses or neighborhood groups or ethnic-based organizations, interest-based organizations. So between these three clusters, we work with them at coming together to develop relationships with each other, explore what interests they might have in common, and give them the skills and capacity to act on those things.
Good night. My name is Maria Glanville. I am from Mexico, and I am amazed for the way in which Canadians are able to organize.
And then there's high-quality training. So the training is provided to both leaders and organizers in the fundamentals of organizing and bringing about change in ways that really equip leaders to take ownership of and responsibility for making their communities what they want them to be.
Okay. Hi, I'm from Habanum Dror, which is a progressive socialist Jewish youth movement. And my two biggest complaints with my youth movement is that we're insular and that we're overly focused on education, and I think are involved with MVA is an amazing way to engage with other people and to still be focused on education but move into a little more activism and organization.
People need to be willing to build relationships, meaningful relationships with people who are unlike themselves. Labor people with faith people, different kinds of people from different faiths coming together and finding their similarities. And it takes some real imagination about building something that they have never really seen before, and so it's really about helping invest in people in the capacity to bring about the kind of world they want to have for themselves.
What the Metropolitan Vancouver Alliance is calling a listening campaign represents one of the very core values of the IAF, and that is not to begin organizing with an issue, but to begin organizing with relationships.
I'm standing next to other community leaders and labor leaders, and we're all saying the same thing with one voice. I think that gives tremendous approval and permission to people who might otherwise be a little bit nervous or unsure about whether or not they should take this step.
So this is the opportunity for us to turn this excitement into real action and bring people, our members out to the launching, which we hope to bring at least 100, if not more, members.
So many groups are getting to know each other now that were never, associated with each other in any way. Everybody had their place. They were over here. It would be like, North Van stays in North Van, there's West Van, there's Vancouver. And now everybody's kind of coming together, and I really like that.
But what I learned from that was that the typical way that I was used to campaigning and organizing was not that productive, and that this was a very, very different model. So I hope that the kind of passion that I developed from, my own, kind of conversion there is something that I can convey tonight and that we can talk about a lot more.
So are you excited about Metro Vancouver Alliance?
Oh yeah, really excited. I mean, it's been years in the making, and a lot of great people have done a lot of hard work to make this happen, and I can't wait to see it take off.
On October 9th, 2014, the Metro Vancouver Alliance held a municipal election accountability assembly. Over 800 people attended the assembly, within which over 50 member institutions were represented. Candidates from 4 major civic parties took part and were asked if they would support the MVA's proposals. This is a brief summary of each of the issues, the proposals, and how each party responded. The entire conference is available at this link. Each segment has been edited from 20 minutes down to 4 minutes. You may be interested in the full responses of the candidates to the questions posed. We encourage you to check it out at this link. The first issue is social isolation.
Social isolation was particularly high on the list of issues that was important to our members. And it's entwined with all of the others, and that's why we put it first. Please welcome Jane Fenrich and Frances Stone, who will present our proposal on social isolation.
Social contact is a basic need of all people and central to a healthy community. People surrounded by a network of close, supportive friends live an average of 15 years longer than those alone. Recently, the Vancouver Foundation reported that 1 in 4 people felt socially isolated, disconnected from their community, lonely, and often depressed. In the Lower Mainland, it's estimated that 50,000 people suffered from depression last year, and 500 died from suicide.
Isolation, by definition, is the condition of being alone. And that is exactly how it felt to me, like I had a condition and I didn't know the cure. When I became a mother, a lot of things changed, including how much I could work. I couldn't afford daycare. I couldn't afford to stay in my community, and when their father went to jail, I ended up on social assistance. Life was hard. Everything was up to me, and me alone. Living in poverty, trying to feed my 3 children, dealing with the Ministry of Children and Family Development, and the stress of bankruptcy. It was a lot. My life makes people uncomfortable. I wanted so much to be a good mother, but instead I was filled with shame with who I was in the world. I wanted to be strong, so I remained silent. It was simply easier to isolate than it was to explain. Please honor the courage that it takes to break the silence by acting on what you hear tonight. Thank you.
The Alliance is seeking from you, candidates, to work with us to develop innovative solutions to social isolation and to reform the permit process to clear the way for small local organizations wishing to put on events.
Are you prepared to work with us at Metro Vancouver Alliance to first develop innovative solutions to social isolation, and number two, to reform the permit process to facilitate small local organizations who wish to put on events?
Yes and yes. Finally, we have to make sure that we fund neighborhood houses, community centers.
So that unequivocal yes and yes. Over to you, Kirk LaPointe, on
yes
the same
and
question.
Yes, yes and yes. I am not the NPA leader that you might think you know. Okay?
Yes and yes on Vision Vancouver's behalf, and a big thank you to all of you for being here, and thanks for the focus on social isolation. So we have an extraordinarily multicultural city. That is our great strength.
And we want to reduce stigma against low-income people, people with mental health issues, and other marginalized people. Yes, the answer is yes and yes.
Yes and yes. Thank you.
Yes, we can. The politicians have agreed to reform the permit process and search for innovative solutions to help combat social isolation. Follow this link to hear the candidates' full answers. Next, transportation. Let's see what the proposals are and whether the politicians will support them.
Demand for public transit has soared, but in the last 7 years, service levels have remained practically unchanged. Extreme overcrowding has eroded reliability and safety, especially for the elderly and the disabled. Handy-dart trip denials have increased 8-fold in only the last 4 years. Meanwhile, fare increases are negatively impacting the lives of the least advantaged. The popular employee pass and family discounts on Sundays and holidays, these were programs that benefited the environment, the economy, and the public, and they have been eliminated. Under provincial pressure, TransLink has cut routes that people depend on. They have reduced service or off-peak service hours to a point where people are left stranded at late hours. TransLink calls these steps optimization, but it is certainly not our service that is being optimized. The remaining issue is how do we fund this plan? Without additional sources of revenue, service is going to continue to fail to accommodate our increasing population. We support the Mayor's first choice of redirecting a portion of the BC carbon tax to sustainable transportation improvements. We want to be a part of the funding discussion, but we will not support fare increases. This is essentially a tax on the poor, the working poor, the disabled, the elderly, single parents, students, and others who can least afford it. And so a region-wide transit referendum is set for March of 2015. This referendum will determine how we fund the Mayor's Council transit plan. We need to have a transit system that will meet our present and our future needs. So we challenge the mayors to craft a question that shows vision and concern for the people of Metro Vancouver. We challenge the province to listen to the transit needs of their public. We must win this referendum.
Are you prepared to, one, actively campaign and encourage your supporters to pass the transit referendum? Two, actively advocate for affordable transit in the region for everyone? And three, participate in at least 2 MVA forums on transportation issues before and after the referendum? Mr. LaPointe.
Yes, yes, and yes. We support a referendum question that is fair, clear, and realistic. We've not made enough progress on the public transit front in the last 6 years. But we need to consider one thing, the implications of redirecting carbon tax revenue, because under law, the carbon tax must be revenue neutral. And the biggest beneficiary of that revenue are lower income British Columbians.
Thank you. Definitely yes on all three. Transit is enormously important to Vancouver. It's arguably the most critical issue we face over these next 6 months with respect to the referendum.
For $3 billion, we could add 400 new buses and light rails in every transit corridors all over Vancouver.
Yes, yes, yes. Good, thank you. Adrian Carr.
Yes, 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 and yes. I do have a proviso. We have not seen the question yet on transit, so the question must be fair. It must be clear, and if it must ask around preferences on how to pay for transit, not whether to pay for transit.
Yes to supporting the transit referendum, yes to affordable transit, and yes to attending the MVA's follow-up forums on transit. Very good so far. Unfortunately, BC's poverty record is not excellent. Though BC is a rich province, it has been the leader in child poverty for 9 of the last 10 years. Let's find out what the MVA proposals on poverty are and if the parties will support them.
The causes of poverty are many, but the results of inadequate income are obvious and costly in terms of health, education, crime, and family breakdown. In Vancouver, nearly 20% of children live in poverty. Even if a child grows up in a family where both parents are working, there is no guarantee that a family will not be poor. Minimum wage cannot lift a family out of poverty. In British Columbia, 43% of poor children live in a family with at least one parent with a full-time job. Metro Vancouver Alliance wants to congratulate New Westminster's City Council, which has already become a living wage employer. A poll conducted by the Columbia Institute showed that 67.1% of respondents agreed that their city should adopt a living wage policy.
My name is Marilyn Diana. I came to Canada through the Live-In Caregiver program in 2000. I am a single mom of one child who was 6 years old at that time and is now 16. I raised my son by myself without any financial support from my son's father. It was a struggle for me and for my son because I went to school during the day and to work at night. When I could get home at 1 a.m. from work, I still had to cook for the next day and study for my lesson. I only have 2 hours sleep a night. Now, I'm paying off my student loans for almost $200 a month. I pay that. I pay my rent. My 3-zone monthly bus pass is $160. I have no savings, no pension plan. My son wants to be an art teacher. I want to support his dream. But how can I support him to go to college? If I earn a living wage, I wouldn't have to worry about my son will get through school.
Are you prepared to work with Metro Vancouver Alliance to first commit to developing a plan to make the City of Vancouver a living wage employer for all directly and indirectly employed workers in the city, and secondly, to promote a living wage plan to other municipalities and other employers?
Yes, and thank you for the questions and the position on this. So Vancouver is a great city and very well run thanks to our city workers. Our city workers do an extraordinary job and make the city tick. And we have a very constructive and respectful relationship with our city unions for the past 6 years. We've enjoyed that in stark contrast to what happened before, an acrimonious relationship that we saw a garbage strike emanate from. We've changed that, and it's very important with the living wage piece that we sit down first and have that conversation with our locals, with our unions, and make sure that we put together as strong as possible an approach that respects the collective agreements and gets a living wage as policy in the city that we can promote far and wide. So we will focus on that. We came in our first action 6 years ago. One of our first actions was to call for a raise in the minimum wage. So we've been strong believers in this. It finally happened, but we need to go a step further.
Thank you.
And 2 weeks ago, I announced that COPE would take leadership by implementing a living wage for all city workers and contractors.
Okay, so we're going to take that as a yes and a yes?
Yes, of course, yes.
Yes and yes. I really believe, and all of the Greens believe, I'm happy to see Cleta Brown and Pete Fry and Misha Oak here with me tonight. We are all completely committed to decreasing the gap between rich and poor in our society.
So we're going to commit to reviewing the impact of these, and we're going to take care of it. If there is favorable impact, we believe that we will do it within 2 years and complete it within the first term. But the answer is yes and yes.
Yes! Yes to a living wage from all politicians. Well, we're batting 100. The last issue is housing. We all know that housing is too expensive. What are the MVA's proposals?
Put any two Vancouverites together, and the conversation will inevitably turn to how tough it is to find decent, affordable housing in the city. According to a leading think tank, Vancouver is the second least affordable housing market in the world. Rising land values have led to spiraling house prices and a crisis of affordability. The average renter in Vancouver earns $34,000 a year. $1,400 for a studio is simply out of reach. The pain is felt across the full range of Vancouver communities, from those on the lowest income, forced to live in squalid, pest-infested, single-room occupancy hotels, to ordinary working families sharing overcrowded apartments. Young families are being driven away from Vancouver in order to find housing that they can afford. It does not have to be this way. This city has the power to make housing safe, secure, and affordable for all. What does it need to do? MVA asked them to start by strengthening and enforcing their own bylaws. This will ensure that the existing housing stock is well maintained and that tenants are protected from rent evictions. The second principle is that it must be forever. Affordability can't just be for the first tenants or owners. The answer is a covenant that applies to all new developments, locking in affordability for the long term.
And the reality is that renting in this city, even in a suburb near my workplace, and maybe a car payment thrown in there, is still going to eat away 60 to 75% of my paycheck. And I make substantially more than the living wage in the city. So in this call to action, I would consider myself lucky, but I'm average in this city. And the affordability in the city is what we're calling a crisis in the Metro Vancouver Alliance. It's unreasonable, it's unacceptable, and it's unethical.
Are you prepared to work with MVA to strengthen, enforce, and extend bylaws to ensure decent standards of maintenance and protect tenants from rent evictions? And will you work with us to make covenants a component in all new developments, locking in truly affordable purchase and rental housing in perpetuity?
The first thing I would do is find out how all the housings in the city are being used. This will allow us to place a duty on vacant properties. Yes and yes.
Good, thank you.
Yes and yes. This is a critical issue for, I think, every Vancouverite. Number one, we must change the SRA bylaw to ensure that SROs are matched to people who are on social assistance at the rate that they can afford. Those things are not in the bylaw right now.
The answers are yes and yes. Maybe at one point we'll get a question that we can answer no to, but I doubt it tonight. And I think we need to commit even more strongly than we ever have to tenants' rights through strengthening and enforcing our bylaws. I understand the feeling of helplessness that low-income tenants often feel, because I've experienced it. I experienced it as a child when we moved around a lot.
The answer is yes and yes. We have had an enormous focus on affordable housing over the past 6 years. Vancouver is a city that everyone wants to live in from around the world, and that's created huge pressure on our housing stock. But we have worked very hard to deliver affordable housing. Record levels of social housing being created over the past several years. Record levels of rental housing being created over the last 2 years, over 1,000 units a year. And we're committing to continue that pace for this next term.
Wow. All the politicians said yes to absolutely everything that the MVA has asked for. That's an excellent start, but will the politicians keep their promises? Only time will tell. Access TV will be tracking their progress, and we will let you know how it goes.